And now, Maine Web News.
Welcome to Maine Web News' first debate forum, and today happened to be the inauguration of our new governor. Paul LePage was inaugurated this morning as Maine's next governor, and that's going to be the topic of discussion, is the new governor's agenda. And a couple of friends with me today. First is Pete Sirois, and Peter produces a show called Maine Social Justice. It's been on for how many years?
I've been doing it for about 6 or 7 years now.
6 or 7 years.
Yeah. And I started out just doing channel 16. It was channel 16 then in Madison, and now I'm seeing in over 30 access channels throughout the country, from the south to the west coast and up in the prairie states, Minnesota and Michigan.
Great.
And about 12 different stations pick me up in the state of Maine.
Well, I've lived in 3 different places in Maine, and I've seen your stuff on all of them. In fact, I just saw you on the Portland CTN website. They played your episode yesterday, so
Yeah.
excellent. Well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
And we have Steve Martin. He is co-host of the Aroostook Watchmen radio show with Jack McCarthy. It runs up in Aroostook County. Now, how far out does that, can you hear that on the radio?
Well, it's about a 5,000 watt signal out of Monticello, so it'll stretch as far as about Lincoln in the south up to the valley, Fort Kent, Madawaska in the north, and out to Millinocket. And of course, there's probably as many people in New Brunswick that can hear as there are on this side of the border.
Do they call in? Do you hear from those folks?
Occasionally. We don't have a call-in portion of the program yet. We're thinking about maybe doing that someday, but we do hear back from some Canadian listeners occasionally.
Great. How long have you had the show going?
We're in our 20th month now. Started back in late May of 2009, early June, in that period, and we're on every morning at 8 a.m. on WXME AM 780 out of Monticello, Maine.
You guys have a great quality of guests. I'm pretty amazed at some of the people I've heard. Bob Chapman and Christopher Monkton. And,
yes. Yeah, we've been really fortunate to schedule guests from all over the world and that are experts in their various fields of study, so to speak, and we're real pleased so far with how things have gone the first couple of years.
Great. Now, you're online as well if someone wants to hear
the
the show.
Yeah, if you want to listen to the show, there's 2 other ways to listen to it. You can dial every morning live, 712-432-7225 is the live listen line. We can't hear you, but you'll be able to hear us for free from where you are. No charge other than whatever your long distance fee may be. You can also click on AroostookWatchmen.com and then click on the radio tower, and you can listen live streaming over the internet every morning, except Sundays. Sundays we're in church, but Monday through Saturday, 8 a.m.
So anyone that gets a chance, check these guys' programs out. They're both excellent. And so let's start off just an opening statement. Maybe tell us something, Steve, that makes you optimistic about the LePage campaign. I know that you were an early supporter of him. You supported him in the primary and through the election. So why did you do that, and what makes you optimistic about Governor LePage?
Well, there's some optimism. There's also some pessimism, some healthy pessimism there. We as you said, we did support Paul. We had several of the candidates on our radio program going back to late last fall and into the spring of this past year. Paul was the one that we brought on that impressed us the most as being a straight shooter. His background is growing up on the streets of Lewiston and just fighting his way to the top, so to speak, making it through Husson College, coming in as a 10-year-old, 11-year-old who had to literally fight for food on the streets of Lewiston. We just feel he's the type of guy who will be hard to compromise. I don't think he's going to be someone who's going to go against his principles. I'm not saying I agree with every single principle that the governor has, but he certainly has enough conservative principles that I think we can make some positive changes. On the flip side, from the pessimistic angle, I know that there's a lot of what we call rhino control still of the Maine GOP in this state, and they're going to do everything they can to mute the conservative message that Paul was elected to endorse and to support. And we've already seen some concern with regard to some of the appointments, with regard to the announcement on Snow. You heard about his announcement that he would not oppose Snow for re-election. Those types of things, of course, are of concern to Tea Party patriots across the state, because we really would like a new day completely, a clean sweep, not lip service to the rhino neoconservative element of the Republican Party. We think we're going to get that with Paul, but we know the pressure on him to bend his philosophy towards their way of thinking is going to be immense. So we as citizens are going to have to stand up and stand behind him.
Great. Yeah, he seemed to be really well supportive of this new Tea Party movement that sprouted up kind of just in time, I think, to support a guy like him, whereas Olympia Snow's not very popular with the Maine Tea Party or the National Tea Party.
That's right.
So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Of course, they have a very personal connection as well that comes into play with him living with her.
Right, which I didn't even really know about until after the election, surprisingly enough. So I don't know if part of the election strategy was to play down that connection or whatnot, or I wasn't just paying enough attention, but I was one of the many Tea Party folks, I think, that was kind of taken aback with the announcement that he would not be supporting a challenger to her. And we, as Maine people, I'm convinced, must find a conservative challenger to Snow in the next primary.
Great. And what are your thoughts? I know that you didn't support Paul in the election,
Well,
but there's some things that you are optimistic about?
There is something I'm optimistic about, and it was his, oddly enough, his stance on regulation. I'm a firm believer in regulation, and as a matter of fact, I brought along a little postcard. I just found this yesterday, and you can show this later. It's affordable retirement homes now renting. To me, this photograph depicts what housing is going to look like, low-income housing without any regulation. And no one can say it won't happen, because I'm old enough to remember when that type of housing existed in my hometown. For people, there was no regulation, and these people lived in abject poverty and shanties. It will return to that without regulation at all.
Well, I've seen tent cities popping up already throughout the country.
So I do think there's a place for regulation. But in today's Sentinel, George Smith, the Maine conservative, by the way, I read him quite a lot. He wrote about regulation, and he had an example today of a regulation that ran amok. It was just way overbearing. And, you know, someone making jam to sell at a lawn sale or church bazaar.
Oh, right, yeah.
Having to have a permit.
Talking about the Maine food.
The main food thing, and I believe in having state food. But that type of regulation is not realistic. We can't have government agents snooping on everybody selling jam or a homemade loaf of bread throughout the state of Maine. I mean, the people of Maine live on going to bazaars and church sales and things like that. We can't have that type of overregulation. However, once an entity becomes so large that their purpose of selling this food is no longer to support a church cause or a non-governmental cause, some charity, for instance. Now their purpose is to make a profit. Once you become a for-profit organization, I do believe in regulation, because we'll say a lady makes 100 jars of jam and sells them to raise money for her church. Good, leave her alone. But if that lady decides she wants to put out 40,000 jars of jam, hire 5 employees to make $100,000 worth of profit at the end of the year, she's going to be prone to want to make $130,000. And she has a couple ways to do this. One, underpay her employees, and the other way is to cut corners in making the jam. And when you cut corners in processing food, that's when the little microbes come in and make people sick, and sometimes they die. Yeah, you have to regulate that. Somehow, the regulation has to be set up in such a way that it's doable.
Well, I know in Waterville, they had a incident where people wanted to grow chickens in town, growing their own food, so I think Paul was supportive of that. And then what happened with regulations, the sort of people in town that made the regulations made it so it was easy for them to do it.
Yeah.
But the average person didn't maybe have so much money to put into a little operation in town, or weren't going to be able to.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how that all ended up panning out. I know that he was standing with the little folks on that one and saying,
well,
hey,
I recall
either everybody
that, yes.
can do it or
Yes.
nobody can do it.
Yeah, well, I'm with him 100% on that. Like I said, I'm definitely, I did not campaign for Paul LePage. But just the same, I wish him well in that he will succeed. I think in the opening prayer, it was mentioned by the Father Daniels from Waterville at the inaugural thing today. He invoked that the man would be inspired to work for all people. And if he does that, you know, I could be switched over to his camp. But only if he goes with people, not business. Because from my experience, the people in business are not on the same page. They're two separate entities.
Well, can I interject something here? When we're talking about business, we're really talking about two things. We're talking about big, multinational, non-loyal to America, monopoly-type businesses, and then we're talking about the mom-and-pop business on the corner that's trying to make a living with, you know, massive regulation on the part of the Augusta government here. I think Paul is, when he's talking about being pro-business, I hope what I've heard in the past and what I believe he is about supporting small business at the expense of monopoly. And in this country, we have made capitalism a naughty word, okay? And it's because we've all allowed ourselves to be taught that capitalism means big agri, big oil, big pharma, okay? And that is the image of business that's been presented to younger generations. Big business has its place, but when you get to be so big that you can literally buy out senators and representatives, or you can literally have laws made that benefit only you to the detriment of your competition, that is no longer legitimate American business. That's illegal monopoly. We have laws on the books against monopoly going all the way back to the 1890s with the Sherman Antitrust Act. We just don't enforce it. Because, unfortunately, what's happened in the federal government level at this point, I'm not talking necessarily about the state level, but in the federal government, most of our major politicians that we've all heard of have already been bought and paid for by either big oil, big agri, big pharma, or some other big monopolistic type of industry or business group. So what we have to do is get the idea through to our children in school that America was founded on laissez-faire capitalism, free market capitalism, but not monopoly capitalism. And the vision of America that most people get in other countries now, Jarrod, is one of, the big, ugly American. We've been known by that because we've allowed ourselves, we've taken the moral element out of business. We need to look at redefining what we mean by corporate law. Our corporate law, when it was originally set up, was much more intended to benefit the people. Corporations were established for a short period of time to accomplish stated goals, and then they were supposed to be dissolved. We've gone from that to where we now have corporations that literally act as people before courts, can override the will of people, can avoid, major punishments when they're duly needed for their activities. One perfect example is the Rockefellers, how they took over the oil industry, not just in America but internationally. That period of time, the great period of the robber barons, we have the temerity to call them robber barons, which is a good thing, but we don't have the courage to follow through today in making sure that our antitrust laws are followed through on, that we don't do things in government to help the little guy like we should be doing it. And we've called Monsanto on our show Monsatan. We've talked over and over again about GMO foods and the danger of GMO foods. This new law, this S510 so-called Food Safety Act, it was not put together by small people and individuals crying out for more protection. It was put together by big agri to crush small family farms and smaller businesses.
So we hope that Governor LePage is going to have regulations written with the people and small business in mind.
Well, it certainly sounded that way this morning. If you listen to his inaugural address, it was all about people first, people before government. And I'm assuming I would like to stretch that to people before corporations as well. If we can get that done, we might get some things done.
Great. Well, he talks a lot on the campaign trail about reducing the size of the government. In fact, I want to show the viewers a clip of Governor LePage on the campaign trail.
We're going to turn over every stone and find out where the fat is and the pork, and we're going to chase it out of town.
So, Peter, do you think that there's still a lot of fat to be cut out of the government, or there are some folks that would say, we're into the meat and the bone at this point? What do you think?
I think let's go back to Paul LePage's record as a mayor of Waterville, because he mentioned that being a mayor of Waterville many times as a qualification of becoming governor.
Yes.
So therefore, as they say in court, he opened up the can of worms. Now, he has to live with it.